She visited her father's grave at midnight and found 20 men waiting in the darkness. Their leader, a Mafia boss, placed a sealed box on the tombstone and said her father had saved his family once. What was inside would reveal the truth about how her father really died and drag her into a world of secrets, betrayal, and impossible promises. The envelope wasn't there when Nora left for work that morning. She knew because she always checked the hallway before locking her apartment door, a habit born from living alone in a building where the super never fixed the broken security camera. But now, at 11:47 p.m., there it was, cream-colored paper, no postage, no return address. Just sitting there like it had been waiting for her all day. Nora Sterling kicked off her heels and let her purse drop to the floor. Her feet ached from 12 hours at the law firm, where she'd spent the day organizing files for partners who barely knew her name. Legal clerk. That's what her business card said, though most days she felt more like a ghost haunting the corridors of other people's important lives. She picked up the envelope. Heavy paper. Expensive. The kind that came from specialty stores, not the corner pharmacy. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a photograph, old and slightly faded at the edges. Her father stared back at her. Younger, maybe 40, his dark hair not yet touched by the gray she remembered from his final years. He was smiling, really smiling, in a way she hadn't seen since before her mother died. His arm was around another man, someone Nora had never seen before. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. They stood in front of a restaurant she didn't recognize, both holding champagne glasses like they were celebrating something important. Nora flipped the photo over. Nothing. No date, no names, no explanation. But there was something else in the envelope. A single card, cream-colored like the paper, with one line written in dark ink. The handwriting was elegant, almost artistic, the kind that came from old-world penmanship training. Meet me where he rests. Midnight. M. Nora's breath caught in her throat. Where he rests. Her father's grave. She checked her phone. 11:52 p.m. 8 minutes until midnight. This had to be a joke. Some sick prank from a coworker, or maybe one of the paralegals who thought they were funny. But even as she thought it, she knew that wasn't right. Nobody at work knew her well enough to even know her father was dead, let alone where he was buried. She looked at the photograph again, studying the stranger beside her father. There was something in the way they stood together, comfortable, familiar. Her father had never mentioned close friends. After her mother died when Nora was 16, he'd become quiet, withdrawn. He went to work at the small accounting firm downtown, came home, made dinner, and spent his evenings reading in his study. When she'd left for college, she'd felt guilty for abandoning him to that lonely routine. When he died of a heart attack 4 years ago, at age 58, she'd cleaned out his apartment and found nothing unusual. No secret letters, no hidden photographs, no evidence of a life beyond the simple, quiet existence she'd always known. Until now. Nora walked to her window and looked out at the street below. Rain had started to fall, turning the asphalt into a black mirror reflecting streetlights. The cemetery was a 20-minute drive from her apartment. If she left now, she'd make it by midnight. If she left now, she was insane. She should call the police. This was clearly some kind of setup. But for what? She had nothing worth stealing, nobody who wanted to hurt her. She was a 35-year-old legal clerk who spent her weekends reading mystery novels and ordering takeout. She wasn't important enough to threaten. But her father, maybe her father had been. The thought sent ice through her veins. Nora grabbed her phone and pulled up the photo app, snapping a picture of the envelope's contents. At least if something happened to her, there would be evidence. Then she forwarded it to her cousin Sarah with a message. If you don't hear from me by 2 a.m., call the police and show them this. She grabbed her raincoat, snatched her keys from the hook, and was out the door before she could talk herself out of it. The drive to Riverside Cemetery took exactly 18 minutes. Nora's windshield wipers beat a frantic rhythm against the rain, and her headlights cut through the darkness like knives. The road was empty. Most sane people were home in bed, not racing toward graveyards at midnight because of anonymous notes. She parked outside the iron gates at 11:58 p.m. The cemetery was closed, officially, but the gates stood slightly ajar. An invitation. Or a trap. Nora cut the engine and sat in the sudden silence, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The rain drummed on the roof of her Honda, and through the windshield, she could see rows of tombstones disappearing into the mist. Her father's grave was in Section C, near a large oak tree. She'd been there a dozen times since his burial. Always during daylight, always alone. She'd bring flowers, white roses, his favorite, and talk to him about her life, her job, the mundane details of existence. She'd never told him anything important, because what was there to say? That she was lonely? That she felt like she was sleepwalking through life? That she'd never understood why he'd become so distant after Mom died. Now, sitting in her car with rain pounding around her, she wondered if maybe she'd never known him at all. Her phone read 11:59. Nora took a deep breath, grabbed the flashlight from her glove compartment, and stepped out into the rain. The cold hit her immediately, soaking through her coat within seconds. She pushed through the gate, its hinges creaking in protest, and started down the gravel path toward Section C. Her flashlight beam bounced wildly, catching on wet stone and marble monuments. The cemetery at night was a different place. During the day, it was peaceful, almost beautiful. At night, it was a city of the dead, and Nora was trespassing. She rounded a bend in the path, and her flashlight illuminated the oak tree. And then she saw them. 20 men, maybe more, standing in perfect formation around her father's grave. They wore black suits, black ties, black everything. Rain streamed down their faces, but none of them moved. They just stood there like statues, like soldiers at attention. Nora's flashlight trembled in her hand. One man stood apart from the others, directly in front of her father's tombstone. Younger than the rest, maybe her age, with dark hair slicked back from his face. He wore the same black suit, but there was something different about him. The way he held himself, the way the others seemed to orient toward him like planets around a sun. He turned to face her, and even in the darkness, she could see his eyes. Dark, steady, completely calm. "Nora Sterling," he said. His voice carried through the rain, quiet but commanding. "Thank you for coming." She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Her mind was screaming at her to run, but her feet were rooted to the ground. The man reached into his jacket. Nora's heart stopped, and pulled out something small and rectangular. He placed it carefully on top of her father's tombstone. A box. Wooden, weathered, sealed with what looked like wax. "My name is Marco Valeni," he said, taking a step toward her. The 20 men didn't move. "And your father saved my family's life." Nora's flashlight beam stayed fixed on Marco Valeni's face. He didn't flinch from the light, didn't look away. Behind him, the 20 men remained motionless, their dark suits blending into the night like they were part of the cemetery itself. "My father," Nora finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper, "was an accountant." Marco's expression didn't change. "Your father was many things. An accountant was just one of them." He gestured toward the box on the tombstone. Up close, Nora could see it was old. The wood worn smooth in places, scratched and dented in others. The wax seal bore an impression she couldn't quite make out in the darkness and rain.
"Open it," Marco said. "Why?"
Nora's grip tightened on her flashlight. Why the theatrics? The midnight meeting, the army of men? If you wanted to give me something, you could have just knocked on my door. For the first time, something flickered across Marco's face. Not quite a smile, but close. Because what's in that box isn't a gift. It's a debt being paid. And debts like this one deserve ceremony. He moved closer, and Nora instinctively took a step back. He stopped immediately, raising his hand slightly, a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I made a promise to your father 15 years ago. I told him that when the time came, I would make sure his daughter knew the truth. That she would be protected. He paused, rain streaming down his face. The time has come. Nora looked past him at the tombstone. Robert James Sterling. Beloved father. 1967 to 2021. The dates were carved deep into the granite. For years he'd been in the ground. For years she'd been visiting this spot, talking to stone and grass, never knowing that somewhere out there, a man like Marco Valeni had been waiting. Protected from what? She asked. From the people who killed him. The words hit her like a physical blow. Nora staggered backward, her heel catching on a root. One of Marco's men moved forward instinctively, but Marco raised a hand, and the man froze. My father died of a heart attack, Nora said, but even as she spoke, she heard the uncertainty in her own voice. The coroner said what he was paid to say. Marco's voice was gentle now, almost sympathetic. Your father died because of me, because of what he knew, because of what he protected. Nora felt the world tilting beneath her feet. The rain, the darkness, the impossible scene before her. It all felt surreal, like she'd stepped into someone else's nightmare. I don't understand, she whispered. Marco reached for the box, carefully breaking the wax seal. The sound of it cracking echoed through the cemetery. He lifted the lid, and even from several feet away, Nora could see what was inside. Papers. Dozens of them, yellowed with age. Photographs. And something else, something that caught the beam of her flashlight and glinted red. A watch. The crystal was cracked, and the leather band was stained dark brown.
Blood.
That was blood. 15 years ago, Marco began, his voice steady despite the rain, your father was working as a legal consultant. Not an accountant. That came later, after he went into hiding. He was brilliant with contracts, with finding loopholes in systems that seemed airtight. He worked for various clients, some of them legitimate, some of them less so. Nora wanted to interrupt, to deny it, but something in Marco's eyes kept her silent. One of his clients was my mother, Isabella Valeni. She was trying to divorce my father, a violent man who controlled everything through fear and money. Your father helped her prepare papers that would have freed her, would have given her access to accounts my father had hidden. It would have destroyed him. Marco's jaw tightened, the first real emotion she'd seen from him. My father found out. He sent men to kill her. But your father, Robert, he was at her apartment that night, delivering the final documents. When the assassins came, he called the police, created a distraction, got my mother out through a back exit. He saved her life. One of the men behind Marco shifted slightly, and Nora realized with a start that he was older than the others. Silver-haired, his face weathered with age. He was staring at her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. That's Dominic, Marco said, noticing her gaze. He was one of the men sent to kill my mother. Your father convinced him to let her go. Offered him money, immunity, a new life.
Dame chose merci.
It's rare in our world. The old man, Dominic, gave a slight nod, his expression unreadable. The poison was meant for my mother, Marco continued, turning back to Nora. She was supposed to die slowly, quietly, in a way that looked natural. A heart attack, maybe. But your father had been watching her, protecting her from the shadows. When someone slipped the poison into her evening tea, he switched the cups. He drank it instead. Nora's knees buckled. She reached out blindly, her hand finding the cold, wet surface of a nearby tombstone for support. No, she breathed. No, that's not. Your father died saving my mother's life, Marco said quietly, just like he'd saved it 15 years before. And I promised him, as he lay dying, that I would keep you safe, that I would tell you the truth when the danger passed. He picked up the box, holding it out toward her. The danger hasn't passed, Nora. It's coming for both of us now. Nora couldn't take the box. Her hands wouldn't move. She stood there in the pouring rain, staring at the collection of papers and photographs and that blood-stained watch, while her entire understanding of her father crumbled around her. You're lying, she said, but the words came out weak, unconvincing even to her own ears. Marco set the box back on the tombstone and reached inside, pulling out one of the photographs. He held it up to her flashlight beam. It was her father again, but younger, maybe in his early 40s. He was sitting at a table across from a beautiful woman with dark hair and sharp eyes. Even in the faded photo, Nora could see the intelligence in her face, the strength in the way she held herself. Between them on the table were stacks of legal documents, and her father was pointing at something, explaining. "Isabella Valenti," Marco said. "My mother. This was taken 3 months before the first attempt on her life." He pulled out another photo. Same woman, but this time she was standing beside a younger Marco. He couldn't have been more than 20. They were at what looked like a graduation ceremony. Isabella's arm was around her son, and both of them were smiling. "Your father took this picture," Marco said softly. "He came to my college graduation. Sat in the back, where no one would notice him. He wanted to see that his sacrifice 15 years ago had meant something. That I'd made it out, gotten an education, had a chance at a different life." Nora's throat tightened. "If he saved your mother, if he was so important to your family, why didn't I know? Why didn't he ever mention you, or her, or any of this?" "Because he loved you," Marco said simply. "And he knew that knowledge could get you killed." He gestured to Dominic, who stepped forward and handed him a manila folder. Marco opened it, revealing what looked like medical reports. "After the first attempt on my mother's life, your father went into hiding. He changed careers, moved to a different part of the city, cut off contact with everyone from his old life. He became Robert Sterling, humble accountant, single father raising a daughter alone. He buried everything he'd been before." "But they found him anyway," Nora whispered. "Not right away. It took them years. My father died 8 years ago, a rival family war, nothing to do with any of this. But his associates never forgot what Robert Sterling had done. They never forgot that he'd cost them Isabella Valenti." Marco pulled out another document, this one more recent. Nora recognized her father's handwriting in the margins, notes, calculations, the careful script she'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists. 3 years before he died, your father discovered something. He'd been keeping tabs on my family, making sure my mother stayed safe. That's when he found out about the poison plot. Someone had finally tracked Isabella down, and they were going to finish what they'd started 15 years earlier. The rain seemed to fall harder, or maybe Nora just noticed it more now. She was soaked through, shivering, but she couldn't look away from Marco's face. "Your father contacted me," Marco continued. "By then, I'd taken over certain family responsibilities. I'd become someone with resources, with power. He asked me to protect my mother, and I did. I moved her to a secure location, put guards on her, made sure she was untouchable. But the poison was still delivered." Dominic spoke for the first time, his voice rough like gravel. "Someone on the inside. Someone we trusted." Marco's expression darkened. "Your father had been investigating for months, trying to figure out who in my organization had turned traitor. He was close, too close. So they changed targets. If they couldn't get to Isabella through me, they'd eliminate the man who kept exposing their plans." He pulled out the watch, holding it carefully. The crystal was indeed cracked, and the dried blood on the band was unmistakable. "This was your father's. He was wearing it when he collapsed in his apartment. The paramedics gave it to the hospital, and the hospital gave it to the coroner. The coroner gave it to me." "Why you?" Nora demanded. "Why not me? I'm his daughter." "Because the coroner was on my payroll," Marco said bluntly. "When Robert Sterling died, I made sure I was notified immediately. I collected everything that might point to the truth, the watch, certain medical samples, witness statements. I kept them safe until I could find proof. Until I could give you more than just a story." He gestured to the box. "This is everything. Lab reports showing the poison in his system. Photos of the traitor making the delivery. Financial records proving the payment. And your father's own notes, his investigation, written in his own hand." Nora finally forced herself to move. She stepped forward, her legs feeling like they belonged to someone else, and looked into the box. There, on top of everything else, was a letter. The envelope was addressed to her in her father's careful handwriting. To Nora. To be opened only if I'm gone. Her hands shook as she reached for it, but Marco caught her wrist gently. Not here, he said. Not in the rain. There are things in that letter. Things you need to read somewhere safe, somewhere warm. Things that will change everything. Nora looked up at him, this stranger who knew her father better than she had. Who was he really? Marco's expression softened. He was the bravest man I've ever known. And he was a father who loved his daughter more than his own life. Marco closed the box and held it out to Nora. This time she took it. The wood was cold and wet under her fingers, heavier than she'd expected. The weight of secrets, she thought. The weight of a life she'd never known existed. There's a coffee shop 3 blocks from here, Marco said. It's open 24 hours. We can talk there, somewhere dry. You can read the letter. Nora looked around at the 20 men still standing in formation, rain streaming down their faces like they were carved from stone. And them. They stay here until we're safely away. Then they disappear. Marco's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. You're under my protection now, Nora, whether you want it or not. I don't need protection, she said, but even she could hear how hollow it sounded. Your father thought the same thing. Marco's eyes locked with hers. He was wrong. The coffee shop was called Rosie's, a tiny place with cracked vinyl booths and a flickering neon sign in the window. At 12:47 a.m., it was empty except for a tired waitress refilling sugar dispensers behind the counter. She barely glanced up when Marco and Nora walked in, dripping water onto the checkered linoleum floor. They took a booth in the back corner. Marco sat facing the door, another habit Nora was starting to recognize. Always watching. Always ready. She set the box on the table between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The waitress brought coffee without being asked, 2 cups of something that looked like it had been sitting on the burner for hours. Nora wrapped her hands around the mug, grateful for the warmth. Your father made me promise 3 things, Marco said finally. The first was to keep you away from this life for as long as possible. He said you were smart, ambitious, that you deserved a normal existence. He made me swear I wouldn't contact you unless absolutely necessary. Nora looked up from her coffee. And the second promise? That when I did contact you, I would tell you everything. No lies, no sugarcoating. He said you'd hate him at first, but that you'd understand eventually. That you were strong enough to handle the truth. What's the third promise? Nora asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Marco's expression grew serious. That I would make sure you survived what comes next. The words hung in the air between them like a threat. Nora pulled the box closer, her fingers finding the edge of the envelope with her name on it. The paper was thick, expensive, the same kind as the note that had brought her to the cemetery. She tore it open. Inside were 3 pages, covered front and back in her father's handwriting. Her eyes blurred with tears as she recognized the familiar loops and curves, the way he dotted his I's and crossed his T's. How many times had she seen that handwriting on birthday cards, permission slips, notes left on the refrigerator? My dearest Nora, it began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Marco Valeni has kept his word. I need you to know that everything I did, every lie I told, every secret I kept, it was all to protect you. Your mother knew the truth. She knew what I was, what I'd done, the people I'd helped. She loved me anyway. When she died, I thought about telling you everything, but you were only 16. You'd just lost your mother. I couldn't bear to make you lose your father too, even if he was still breathing. So, I became someone simpler. Someone safer. I took the accounting job. I lived quietly. I pretended that my old life had never existed. But some debts can never be fully paid, Nora. Some promises last beyond death. Nora's hands trembled as she turned to the second page. I saved Isabella Valeni twice. The first time, I was young, idealistic, believing I could use the law to protect people from monsters. The second time, I was older, and I knew the truth. Sometimes the only way to stop a monster is to become something darker than they are. I poisoned myself, Nora. Not accidentally. Not as some heroic sacrifice in the moment. I knew what they were planning, and I knew the only way to save Isabella was to drink from that cup. I had maybe 3 minutes before the poison took hold. I used those 3 minutes to call Marco, to tell him where the traitor was, to give him the evidence he needed. And I used the last 30 seconds to write down 3 promises for him to keep. The third page was shorter, and the handwriting grew shakier toward the end, like her father had been struggling to hold the pen. The world I lived in operates on debts and promises. Marco Valenti is a dangerous man, but he's a man of honor. When I die, the protection I've kept around you all these years will expire. The people who wanted Isabella dead will eventually figure out that you exist. That you might know something. That you might have evidence. Marco's third promise was this. He would keep you alive until you were strong enough to face this world on your own terms. Not as a victim. Not as someone to be protected.
But as someone who could fight back.
The wish has expired, Nora. You're 35 years old. You're brilliant, capable, stronger than you know. The evidence in this box is everything I collected over 15 years. Proof of corruption, murder, betrayal at the highest levels of Marco's organization. Someone very close to him is the traitor. Someone he trusts completely. Use this evidence wisely. Trust Marco, but verify everything. And remember, your mother and I loved you more than life itself. That love is the only truth that matters. Your father, Robert. Nora set the letter down with shaking hands. Marco sat perfectly still across from her, his coffee untouched, his dark eyes watching her face. You knew, she said. You knew what the letter said. Your father told me, yes. Before he died, in those final minutes. He wanted me to understand what I was promising. Someone close to you, Nora said, her voice barely audible. A traitor. Who? Marco's jaw tightened. I don't know. That's why I need your help. Nora stared at Marco across the coffee-stained table. You need my help? You have 20 armed men, and what I'm guessing is an entire criminal organization at your disposal. What could I possibly? Those 20 men?
Marco interrupted quietly.
Any one of them could be the traitor. The 50 men who weren't there tonight?
Same.
The lawyers, accountants, drivers, cooks. Everyone in my world operates on loyalty until they don't. Your father knew that. That's why he came to me instead of working through my channels. He pulled the box closer and began removing documents, spreading them across the table between coffee cups and sugar packets. Court papers, photographs, bank statements, all marked with her father's careful annotations. Your father spent 3 years investigating my organization from the outside. He had no allegiance to anyone in my world, no reason to protect them. That made him the only person I could trust. Marco's finger traced a line of numbers on one of the papers. And now that he's gone, you're the only person who can finish what he started. Nora picked up one of the documents. It was a legal filing for something called the Mercy Street Foundation, a charitable trust established in 2019. The signature at the bottom made her breath catch. Dario Conti, Consigliera. Consigliera, she said. That's like an advisor, right? More than that. A consigliera is a family's counselor, their connection to the legitimate world. Dario has been with my family for 23 years. He was my father's most trusted friend. After my father died, he helped me take over, taught me everything about how the business really works. Marco's voice was tight, controlled. He's like an uncle to me. Nora studied the document more carefully. The foundation claimed to support youth programs in underserved neighborhoods, basketball courts, after-school tutoring, job training. Noble work. But her father had drawn red circles around certain financial entries, with question marks and calculations in the margins. These numbers don't make sense, she said, her legal training kicking in automatically. The foundation received $2 million in donations last year, but only $600,000 went to actual programs. Where did the rest go? Administrative costs. Supposedly, Marco pulled out another document, this one a bank statement. Dario handles all the legitimate businesses, the restaurants, the real estate holdings, the charitable foundations. He's brilliant at moving money through legal channels, making everything look clean. Nora laid the documents side by side, her mind working through the implications. These transfers here, they're going to shell companies. Different names, different addresses, but look at the patterns. Same amounts, same intervals, always on the 15th of the month. She grabbed another paper from the box, this one covered almost entirely in her father's handwriting. It was a chart, a web of connections drawn between names and companies. At the center was Dario Cani's name, circled 3 times in red ink. Your father tracked these payments for 18 months, Marco said. He found 12 different shell companies, all registered to fake addresses, all receiving regular transfers from legitimate Valeni businesses. The money goes in clean and comes out cleaner, but it never actually does what it's supposed to do.
Laundering, Nora said.
But you already launder money, don't you? Isn't that just part of what you do? We launder money for the family, Marco said. This money is disappearing, going somewhere else entirely. Dario has been skimming from us for years, but he's been doing it so carefully, so legally, that no one noticed. Nora found another document, a ledger, handwritten in what looked like accounting shorthand. But mixed in with the numbers were phrases in her father's familiar script. Meeting with DC, Federal Building, June 12th. And another. D. C-phone's call logged, unknown recipient, DC area code. DC, Nora said slowly. Washington, DC. Marco's expression darkened. Keep reading. She flipped through more pages, finding more of her father's notes. D.C. meeting with Assistant U.S. Attorney, possible immunity deal? And then, dated just 2 months before her father's death. Confirmed. Dario trading information for immunity. Valeni indictment coming within 6 months. Nora's hands went cold. She looked up at Marco. He's working with the federal government. Dario is giving them everything they need to destroy you. Not just me. Everyone. My entire organization. Everyone who depends on it. Everyone who's been loyal to my family for decades. Marco's voice was deadly calm, but Nora could see the rage burning behind his eyes. Dario has been building a case against us while pretending to be our protector. And he's been getting rich doing it. Immunity from prosecution, protection for his own crimes, and millions in skimmed money to set up his new life. Nora pulled out more documents, spreading them across the table until there was barely room for the coffee cups. Transfer records, legal filings, meeting notes. Her father had documented everything. And woven through it all was Dario Cani's name, appearing again and again like a ghost haunting every page. This is insane, she whispered. Why didn't your father just show you this before he died? Why wait? Because he wasn't sure, Marco said. Look at the dates. Your father was poisoned before he could confirm the last piece, who Dario's contact in the U.S. Attorney's office was. Without that, it's just speculation. Dario could claim the money was going to legitimate investments, that the meetings were routine legal business. Nora found the last page in the stack, another note in her father's handwriting. This one was dated the day he died. Final meeting with source, Federal Building, 3 p.m. We'll have name of U.S. Attorney running investigation. We'll have timeline for indictments. We'll confirm Dario's immunity deal. Then we can move. Below that, in shakier handwriting, poisoned. 20 minutes, maybe less. Marco, the evidence is in the box. The source's name is. The sentence ended there, unfinished. Her father had run out of time. Nora traced her finger over the incomplete sentence, imagining her father's final moments. Knowing he was dying. Racing against the poison in his bloodstream to write down one last crucial piece of information. Failing. He almost had it, she said softly. He was so close. Marco gathered the documents back into the box with careful, deliberate movements. Your father was a meticulous investigator. If he was meeting a source at the Federal Building, there would be records. Security logs, visitor registrations. But I can't access those. My people can't walk into a federal building and start asking questions. But I can, Nora said, understanding dawning. I'm a legal clerk. I work with court documents every day. I know how to navigate federal systems. Your father understood legal structures, the frameworks that hold organizations together, Marco said. He could look at a foundation's tax returns and see the crime hidden in legitimate expenses. He could trace money through corporate veils that looked impenetrable. His eyes met hers. I only understand power.
Force.
Leverage. Your father gave me evidence, but I don't know what half of it means. Nora pulled the box back toward her, looking at the papers with new eyes. This wasn't just evidence of Dario's betrayal. It was a puzzle her father had been building for years. Each document was a piece, carefully collected and annotated. He'd been teaching her, even in death, showing her how to see the patterns. If I help you, she said slowly, what happens to Dario? Marco's expression didn't change. What do you think happens? That's not an answer. In my world, betrayal has one remedy. It's not pretty, and it's not legal, but it's absolute. Marco leaned forward, his voice dropping. But your father's last words to me weren't about revenge. He said, truth isn't vengeance. It's the only way out. I didn't understand what he meant then. Maybe you can help me understand now. Nora thought about her father, the quiet accountant who'd made her breakfast every morning, who'd helped her with homework, who'd attended every parent-teacher conference alone after her mother died. And then she thought about the other man, the one in these photographs, the one who'd saved a woman's life, who'd poisoned himself to protect someone else's mother. Which one was real? Or were they both real, somehow? If we expose Dario through the system, she said carefully, if we prove what he's done using his own evidence, then his immunity deal falls apart. You can't get immunity for crimes you're still committing. If he's been laundering money and selling information while claiming to cooperate with federal prosecutors, that's fraud, obstruction, conspiracy. And he goes to prison instead of dying in an alley, Marco said. Is that enough for you? Marco was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table. My father would have killed him without hesitation. My grandfather would have killed his entire family as a warning to others. But your father asked me to be different. To find another way, he looked at her. I don't know if I can be that person, but I can try. Nora made her decision. She reached across the table and opened the box again, pulling out the documents one by one. Then we need to organize this. Create a timeline. Figure out what my father knew, and what we still need to find. Marco raised an eyebrow. My father died for this, Nora said, her voice hardening. Someone murdered him and made it look natural. Made me believe for 4 years that he just left me, that his heart gave out because he was stressed or tired or lonely. I buried him thinking I'd never told him enough that I loved him, never spent enough time with him, her hands clenched into fists.
So yes,
I'm going to finish what he started. Marco studied her face for a moment, then nodded. Okay, but there are rules. You don't go anywhere alone. You don't talk to anyone about this without clearing it with me first. And if I say we stop, if I say it's too dangerous, you listen. I'm not one of your soldiers, Nora said.
No.
You're the daughter of the man I owe everything to. Which means keeping you alive is the only promise that matters. Marco pulled out his phone. I'm putting 2 of my people on you starting tomorrow. They'll keep their distance, but they'll be watching. That's not necessary. It's not negotiable. His tone left no room for argument. Your father kept you hidden for 35 years. The moment you start digging into Dario's files, asking questions about federal investigations, that protection disappears. Dario will know. And if he killed your father to protect his secrets, he won't hesitate to kill you. The weight of it settled over Nora, like a physical thing. Yesterday, her biggest concern was whether to order Thai or Italian for dinner. Now she was sitting in a 24-hour diner with a Mafia boss, planning to expose a traitor and solve her father's murder. There's something else, Marco said, pulling out one more document from the bottom of the box. Your father embedded messages in these ledgers. See these numbers here? They're dates and times. Meeting schedules. He was documenting every interaction Dario had with his federal contact. Nora looked at the columns of figures. At first they seemed random, but then she saw it, patterns in the chaos, just like her father had taught her to find patterns in legal documents. He created a code, she whispered, using accounting principles to hide information in plain sight. Can you crack it? Nora smiled, a fierce expression her father would have recognized. Give me a laptop and 24 hours. If Dad left us a trail, I'll find it. Nora didn't go home that night. Marco took her to a place he called the office, a penthouse apartment in a high-rise downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It wasn't what she'd expected. No guards at the door, no weapons visible, no dark wood paneling and leather furniture like in the movies. Instead, it was modern and sparse. White walls, minimal furniture, a massive desk with 3 computer monitors. You live here? Nora asked, setting the box down on a glass coffee table. I work here. I live somewhere else. Marco pulled out a laptop from a drawer and set it in front of her. No internet connection. Air-gapped for security. But it has everything you'll need. Spreadsheet software, database programs, encryption tools. Nora sat down and opened the laptop, her fingers already itching to start. I'll need coffee. Lots of it. Already handled. Marco gestured to a kitchen area where a high-end espresso machine gleamed on the counter. Help yourself. I'll be in the next room making calls. Shout if you need anything. He started to leave, then paused. Nora, your father worked on this for 3 years. Don't expect to solve it in one night. My father had to hide what he was doing, Nora said, already pulling documents from the box. I don't. That gives me an advantage. By 4 a.m., Nora had filled 3 legal pads with notes and created a spreadsheet with over 200 entries. Her father's code was elegant, using legitimate accounting practices to hide meeting dates, locations, and participants. A donation to the Mercy Street Foundation on March 15th for $12,347. That translated to 3/15, 12:34 p.m., Location 7, which corresponded to a list of addresses her father had compiled. She cross-referenced each coded entry with news reports, federal court calendars, and the dates on her father's handwritten notes. Slowly, a picture emerged. Dario Cani had been meeting with someone from the U.S. Attorney's Office every 2 weeks for almost 3 years. Always at different locations, always during business hours when such meetings could be explained as routine legal consultations. You're still at it. Marco's voice came from behind her. Nora jumped, spinning around in her chair. Marco stood in the doorway, now wearing dark jeans and a white t-shirt instead of his suit. He looked younger, more human. He was holding 2 mugs of coffee. I didn't hear you come in, she said. I know. That's the point. He handed her one of the mugs and sat down in a chair across from her, studying the papers spread across the coffee table. What have you found? 43 meetings between Dario and his federal contact. They started small lunch meetings, coffee shops. But over time, they got longer, more frequent. And look at this, she pulled up a specific entry. 6 months ago, the meetings moved to the federal building itself. That means whatever Dario was offering, they were taking it seriously enough to bring him inside. Marco's jaw tightened. 6 months ago, 3 of my operations got raided. We lost 2 warehouses and almost a dozen men got arrested. Dario told me we had a leak somewhere in the lower ranks. We spent months investigating our own people while he was the leak, Nora finished. And he got to look like the hero, helping you hunt for a traitor that didn't exist. Marco stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the city, beginning to wake up. The sky was turning from black to deep blue, the first hint of dawn touching the horizon. I've known Dario since I was 12 years old, he said quietly. When my father died, Dario could have taken over. He had the connections, the respect, the knowledge. Instead, he stepped aside and supported me. Taught me everything. Told me I had the blood, the name, the right to lead. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I trusted him more than anyone. Nora saved her work and closed the laptop. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why do you do this? Run a criminal organization? I mean, you're obviously intelligent. You could be anything, do anything. Why choose this life? Marco turned to face her, and in the dim light, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. Not from lack of sleep, but something deeper. Soul-tired. I didn't choose it. I inherited it. Like you inherited your father's eyes, his handwriting, his way of seeing patterns in chaos. He moved back to his chair, sitting down heavily. My father built an empire on fear and violence. When he died, hundreds of people depended on that empire for their livelihoods. Families who needed protection. Businesses that needed services. I could have walked away, but what would have happened to them? Someone else would have taken over, Nora said. Someone worse. Someone like my father. Marco leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I've spent 8 years trying to transform what he built. Moving money from illegal operations into legitimate businesses. Protecting people instead of exploiting them. It's slow, and it's messy, and half my organization thinks I'm weak because I don't solve every problem with a bullet. Is that why Dario betrayed you? Nora asked. Because he disagreed with the changes? Maybe. Or maybe he just saw an opportunity and took it. Marco rubbed his face. Your father asked me once why I didn't just walk away if I wanted out. I told him I couldn't leave clean. He said, then wash the blood before you go. I think about that a lot. Nora looked at him, really looked at him. Not the mafia boss who'd stood in a cemetery with 20 men, but the person underneath. Someone trying to escape his father's shadow, just like she'd been trying to understand hers. My father was a good man, she said softly. But he lived in shadows. Kept secrets. Died protecting people I didn't even know existed. Sometimes I'm angry at him for that. For not trusting me with the truth. He trusted you with everything that mattered, Marco said. He gave you a normal life. A chance to be someone other than the daughter of a man who saved gangsters and poisoned himself for honor. That was his gift to you. And now I'm sitting here, decoding secret messages with a crime boss. Nora smiled despite herself. Some gift. Marco smiled back, the first genuine expression she'd seen from him. Your father would be proud. And furious. Probably both. By noon the next day, Nora had cracked the entire code. She sat back from the laptop, her eyes burning, her third cup of coffee gone cold beside her. Marco stood behind her, reading over her shoulder at the spreadsheet that laid out 3 years of systematic betrayal. There, Nora said, pointing to a column of data. This is the smoking gun. 3 weeks before each major raid on your operations, Dario moved money out of those specific businesses into his shell companies. He wasn't just selling information. He was looting your organization before the feds could seize the assets. Marco's hand gripped the back of her chair, his knuckles white. How much? $12 million over 3 years. Maybe more. These are just the transfers I can trace. Nora pulled up another document. And look at this. My father found the immunity agreement. Dario's contact in the U.S. Attorney's Office is someone named Patricia Chun, Assistant U.S. Attorney specializing in organized crime. She's been running an investigation called Operation Crossroads for the past 4 years. I've never heard of it, Marco said. That's because it's sealed. Grand jury investigation, everything classified. But my father found meeting notes, case numbers, even draft indictments. Nora's voice was tight with anger. Dario was supposed to testify against you and 17 other members of your organization. In exchange, he gets full immunity, witness protection, and he keeps all the money he skimmed. He was going to destroy you and retire rich. Marco walked away from the desk, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Nora thought he might put one through the wall. Instead, he stood perfectly still, breathing slowly, deliberately. When he finally spoke, his voice was ice-cold. I need to call a meeting. Bring him in. No, Nora said sharply. Marco turned to look at her. Excuse me? You heard me. No, she stood up, facing him. If you bring Dario in, if you confront him with your men around, what happens? You kill him. Maybe not immediately, maybe you make him talk first, but he ends up dead. And then what? Then the traitor is gone, Marco said simply. And the federal investigation continues. Patricia Chun has everything Dario gave her. She has testimony, documents, evidence. Killing Dario doesn't make that disappear. It just makes you look guilty and gives her more ammunition. Nora moved closer, her voice urgent. My father spent his last minutes writing that truth isn't vengeance. Don't you see? He was telling you there's another way. What other way? Marco's voice rose. Dario sold me out. He's been stealing from my family, lying to my face, setting up my people to go to prison. You want me to what? Forgive him? Take him to court. I want you to expose him, Nora said. Using his own evidence. Using the system he thought would protect him. Marco stared at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. You want to go to the federal prosecutors? Tell them what, exactly? That I'm a crime boss who discovered my consigliera is a double agent? They'll arrest both of us. Not if we do it right. Nora's mind was already racing, pieces falling into place. Dario's immunity agreement has conditions. He has to provide truthful testimony. He has to fully cooperate. If we can prove he's been lying, committing new crimes while under immunity, the whole deal collapses. How do we prove that? We get him to confess. Nora pulled up a file on the laptop. My father recorded one of his meetings with Dario. It's here in the box, an audio file on a USB drive. I listened to it at 6 a.m. It's from 2 years ago, and in it, Dario admits to the poison plot that killed my father. Marco moved quickly, suddenly beside her, looking at the laptop screen. Your father recorded him. He recorded everything. He was building a case, Marco. A real case, with real evidence that could hold up in court. Nora's voice shook. There's 30 minutes of audio where Dario talks about targeting my father, about making it look like a heart attack, about timing it so no one would suspect murder. He even jokes about it. The rage that flashed across Marco's face was terrifying. Let me hear it. Nora plugged in the USB drive and opened the audio file. Her father's voice came through the laptop speakers, steady and calm, asking questions like he was conducting a deposition. And then Dario's voice, smooth, confident, with a slight Brooklyn accent. Robert, you worry too much. The old man drank the tea. He had his heart attack, case closed. Nobody's looking at it twice. But if someone did look, her father's voice, they'd find nothing. I used someone outside the family, paid in cash, untraceable. It's cleaner than clean. And Marco doesn't know. Dario laughed on the recording. Marco doesn't know half of what I do for him. Kid thinks he's running things, but he's just the face. I'm the one keeping this organization alive. And when the feds finally move, I'll be on a beach somewhere while he rots in a cell. Marco's hand slammed down on the desk, making Nora jump. That's enough. She stopped the recording. There's more. 20 more minutes where he details the whole operation, the immunity deal, the shell companies, his plan to dismantle your organization piece by piece. And you want to give this to the federal prosecutors, Marco said flatly. I want to use it as leverage, Nora corrected. We arrange a meeting with Dario. We play him the recording. We give him a choice. Go to Patricia Chun and confess everything, admit he's been playing both sides, or we release the recording publicly and destroy him.
He'll run, Marco said. Maybe.
But where? His immunity deal evaporates the moment this recording surfaces. The feds will want him for obstruction. You'll want him for betrayal. He'll have nowhere to go. Nora met his eyes. This is what my father wanted. Truth, not vengeance. 3 days later, Nora stood in an abandoned warehouse on the waterfront, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The building had been a shipping facility once. Rusted machinery still lined the walls, and broken pallets littered the concrete floor. Marco had chosen it carefully, isolated, easy to secure, with only one way in and one way out. He'll be here in 10 minutes, Marco said, checking his phone. He wore his black suit again, back in his role as the boss. But Nora had seen the man underneath now, and she couldn't unsee it. And your men? She asked. Outside. Close enough to respond if things go wrong. Far enough away that Dario won't feel ambushed. Marco looked at her. You don't have to be here for this. You can wait in the car. He helped kill my father, Nora said quietly.
I'm staying.
They'd spent the past 3 days preparing. Nora had compiled every piece of evidence into a single folder: financial records, meeting logs, the immunity agreement her father had obtained through his mysterious source, and the recordings. Especially the recordings. Marco had arranged the meeting through carefully worded messages, telling Dario they needed to discuss security concerns regarding a new federal investigation. Dario had no idea what was coming. Headlights swept across the warehouse windows. A black sedan pulled up outside, and through the grimy glass, Nora saw a man emerge. Tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit. Dario Conti moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged, never been caught. The warehouse door creaked open, and he stepped inside. Marco, Dario said warmly, his voice echoing in the empty space. What's with the dramatics? We could meet at the office? Then he saw Nora, and something flickered across his face. Confusion, maybe curiosity. Who's this? Nora Sterling, Marco said. Robert Sterling's daughter. The change in Dario was subtle, but unmistakable. His smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. His eyes narrowed slightly. Robert Sterling. That name sounds familiar. It should, Nora said, finding her voice. You had him killed. Dario laughed, but it sounded forced. I don't know what you're talking about. Marco, what is this? Instead of answering, Marco pressed play on a small speaker he'd set up on a metal table. The warehouse filled with the sound of her father's voice, calm and measured, asking questions. And then Dario's voice, younger but unmistakable. Robert, you worry too much. The old man drank the tea. He had his heart attack, case closed. Dario's face went pale. He looked from the speaker to Marco to Nora, and she watched him calculate, his mind racing through options. Run? Fight? Deny? That recording is 4 years old, Marco said, his voice deadly calm. Robert Sterling gave it to me before he died. Along with this. He opened the folder and pulled out documents one by one, laying them on the table like playing cards. Bank statements. Transfer records. Meeting logs. The immunity agreement with Patricia Chen's signature at the bottom. You've been working with the federal government, Marco continued, selling information about my operations in exchange for immunity and the freedom to loot my businesses. $12 million over 3 years, Dario. You stole $12 million from my family while pretending to serve us. Marco, listen. Dario started, his hands raised. I'm not finished. Marco pulled out another document. This is a draft indictment. 17 names on it, including mine. You were going to testify against all of us. Your testimony was supposed to destroy my entire organization. Dario's composure cracked. You don't understand. The feds had me cornered. They had evidence. They had evidence you gave them, Nora shouted, stepping forward. You created the case against Marco while stealing from him. And when my father figured it out when he got too close, you killed him. I didn't. Dario stopped, seeing the trap he'd almost walked into. Marco picked up the speaker and turned up the volume. Dario's recorded voice filled the warehouse again. I used someone outside the family, paid in cash, untraceable. It's cleaner than clean. You're finished, Dario, Marco said. The question is how you finish. I could kill you right now. My men are outside. Your body would never be found. That's what my father would have done. It's what everyone expects me to do. Dario's hand moved toward his jacket, and instantly 3 red lasers appeared on his chest. Nora gasped. She hadn't even realized Marco's men had gotten into position. Don't, Marco said softly. Just don't. Dario froze, then slowly moved his hand away from his jacket.
So, this is it?
You brought me here to execute me? No, Nora said, and both men looked at her. We brought you here to give you a choice. She pulled out one more document, something she'd drafted herself over the past 3 days. working through the legal implications with a precision her father would have appreciated. "This is a confession," she said. "Everything you've done, the immunity deal, the theft, the obstruction of justice, my father's murder. You sign this, and we take it to Patricia Chun. You tell her you've been lying, that you've been committing crimes while under immunity. Your deal falls apart, but you also give evidence against the person who actually poisoned my father." "I already told you, I used someone outside." "You gave the order," Nora interrupted. "But someone carried it out. Someone delivered the poison. We want that name." Dario looked at the confession, then at Marco. "And if I do this, I go to prison for the rest of my life." "Yes," Marco said. "But you go to prison alive. Your family stays safe. And somewhere, in some small way, you pay your debt to Robert Sterling." Dario Connie stared at the confession for a long time. In the dim warehouse light, Nora could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold air seeping through broken windows. His hand trembled as he reached for the paper. "You want the name of the person who delivered the poison?" Dario's voice was hoarse. "It was Vincent Marcuso, low-level enforcer from the Castellano family. I paid him $20,000 cash to slip the poison into Robert's tea at a coffee shop. Robert had a routine, same place, same time every Tuesday. It was easy." Nora felt her stomach turn. Her father's Tuesday afternoon coffee. She teased him about it, how he was so predictable. That predictability had killed him. "Vincent's still around?" Marco asked. "Last I heard, he moved to Florida. Pensacola, maybe. He doesn't know who hired him. I used an intermediary." Dario picked up the pen beside the confession. "You really think this will work? That will just tear up my immunity deal?" "Your immunity deal required truthful cooperation," Nora said. "You committed new crimes while under federal protection. You lied about your involvement in ongoing criminal activities. Legally, the agreement is void. Patricia Chun will have no choice but to prosecute you." "She'll offer me a new deal," Dario said. "Testify against Marco, and maybe I get reduced charges." "Maybe," Marco said. "But you won't take it." Dario laughed bitterly. "Why wouldn't I?" "Because if you do, every criminal organization in the country will know you betrayed not one but two deals. You'll spend the rest of your life in witness protection, looking over your shoulder, waiting for someone to find you." Marco's voice was cold. "At least in prison you have a chance. Keep your mouth shut about me, serve your time, and maybe you live long enough to see daylight again." "That's not a guarantee," Dario said. "No," Marco agreed. "It's not. But it's more than you gave Robert Sterling." Dario's hand hovered over the paper. "I didn't want to kill him. You have to understand. Robert was a good man. But he knew too much. He was going to expose me, and I'd worked too hard, too long, to let some accountant destroy everything." "He wasn't just an accountant," Nora said, her voice shaking with rage. "He was my father. And you took him from me because he was decent. Because he tried to do the right thing." "The right thing," Dario repeated. "In this world, the right thing gets you killed. Your father knew that. He should have walked away." "He tried," Nora said. "He spent 15 years walking away. But you couldn't let him, could you? Even in hiding, even living a quiet life, he was still a threat to you." Dario signed the confession with a scrawl, threw the pen down on the table.
"There. Happy?"
"I've just signed away my life." Marco picked up the document, checking the signature. "You signed away your life the moment you betrayed this family. This just makes it official." "What happens now?" Dario asked. "Now I make a call," Nora said, pulling out her phone. "Patricia Chun has been looking for evidence of corruption in organized crime for years. She's about to get exactly what she wanted, just not the way she expected." 2 hours later, Nora sat in a small office in the federal building, the same building where her father had died trying to get one last piece of information. Across from her sat assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Chun, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. Marco had stayed behind. This meeting needed to be clean, legal, untainted by his presence. "Let me make sure I understand," Chin said, her voice clipped and professional. You're Robert Sterling's daughter, and you're bringing me evidence that my star witness in Operation Crossroads has been lying to me for 3 years. Yes, Nora said. She slid the folder across the desk. Everything's in here. Financial records showing Dario Conti embezzled $12 million while under immunity. Meeting logs proving he committed new crimes while supposedly cooperating with your investigation. And his signed confession, including the name of the man he hired to murder my father. Chin opened the folder, her expression carefully neutral. But Nora watched her eyes widen slightly as she read through the documents, saw the moment when the full scope of Dario's betrayal became clear. Your father was Robert Sterling, Chin said slowly. The man who died of a heart attack 4 years ago. The man who was poisoned 4 years ago, Nora corrected. By Vincent Marcuso, on Dario Conti's orders. My father was investigating Dario, and Dario killed him to protect his immunity deal with you. Chin was quiet for a long moment, reading through the confession. How did you get this? Does it matter? Nora asked. It's a voluntary confession. Dario signed it willingly. He's willing to testify about everything, the embezzlement, the obstruction, my father's murder. Everything except Marco Valenti's operations. Of course, Chin said dryly. He won't testify against Valenti. Which means my entire investigation is compromised. Your investigation was built on lies, Nora said. Dario wasn't cooperating. He was manipulating you. He fed you information designed to destroy Valenti's organization while protecting himself and his stolen money. If you'd gone to trial based on his testimony, any decent defense attorney would have torn it apart. Chin closed the folder, her jaw tight. You realize what you're doing here? You're protecting a known criminal. I'm exposing a murderer, Nora said. What you do with that information is up to you. Chin stood, the folder in her hand. I'll need to verify all of this. Interview Dario, myself. If what you're saying is true, if he's been lying to us, then yes, his immunity agreement is void. He'll be charged with everything: conspiracy, murder, embezzlement, obstruction. And Marco Valenti? Nora asked. Chen's expression hardened. One case at a time, Miss Sterling. One case at a time. The federal raid on Dario Conti's properties happened 72 hours later. Nora watched the news coverage from Marco's penthouse office, seeing agents in FBI windbreakers carrying boxes of evidence from Dario's brownstone in Brooklyn. The cheer-in at the bottom of the screen read, Federal prosecutors star witness arrested on multiple charges. Marco stood by the window, silhouetted against the morning sun, silent. Patricia Chin moved fast, Nora said, setting down her coffee cup. She must have verified everything in a single day. She had no choice, Marco replied without turning. If word got out that her key witness was corrupt, it would destroy every case she's built in the last 3 years. Better to cut Dario loose publicly, make herself look like the hero who rooted out corruption. He paused. Politics. It worked, though. Dario's going to prison. For murder, embezzlement, obstruction, yes. He'll die behind bars. Marco finally turned to face her. But the cost, Nora. You need to understand the cost. Over the past 3 days, Nora had learned exactly what Marco meant. The moment Dario's arrest became public, the underworld had turned on Marco. His allies questioned his judgment. How had he not known his own consigliera was a federal informant? How had he let it happen? Whispers of weakness, of incompetence, spread through the organization like wildfire. 3 of Marco's captains had already requested meetings to discuss leadership. 2 families that had been neutral suddenly became hostile. And yesterday, Marco had told her that someone had taken a shot at one of his restaurants. A warning, a message that his protection was no longer absolute. You're losing control, Nora said quietly. I'm losing the empire my father built, Marco corrected. Which is different. That empire was built on fear and violence. I've been trying to transform it into something else, something sustainable, legal, clean. But the people who profited from my father's way of doing things don't want change. Dario's betrayal gave them the excuse they needed to challenge me. He walked to his desk and pulled out a folder, handing it to Nora. Inside were legal documents, incorporation papers, transfer agreements, charitable foundation filings. "What is this?" she asked. "The beginning of the end," Marco said. "Or the beginning of something new, depending on how you look at it. I'm dismantling the organization, converting the legitimate businesses into actual legitimate businesses. The restaurants, the construction companies, the real estate holdings, they're all being restructured with proper oversight, proper accounting, proper everything." Nora flipped through the documents, recognizing the careful legal work. "This is brilliant. You're essentially laundering the businesses in reverse, taking criminal enterprises and making them clean. Your father suggested it years ago. He said the only way out was to build something real, something that could survive without the criminal foundation." Marco smiled sadly. "I thought I had more time. But Dario's arrest accelerated everything. The old guard wants me gone, and the new generation doesn't trust me. So I'm giving them what they want. I'm stepping back." "You're walking away," Nora said, understanding dawning. "I'm washing the blood before I go," Marco said. "Like your father told me to." A week later, Nora stood in front of her father's grave once again. It was early morning, the cemetery quiet except for birdsong and the distant sound of traffic. No rain this time. No men in black suits. Just her and Marco, and the truth that had been buried here. Marco carried the weathered wooden box, the same one he'd placed on the tombstone that first midnight. He set it down gently, and Nora noticed that it was empty now. All the evidence had been given to the authorities, used to build the case against Dario Cani. "He saved my blood," Marco said, echoing words from that first night. "You gave it meaning." Nora knelt beside the grave, tracing her fingers over her father's name carved in granite. "I was so angry at him," she said. "For years after he died, I was angry. He was distant, secretive. I thought he didn't trust me, didn't love me enough to let me in." "He loved you enough to keep you out," Marco said. "There's a difference." "I understand that now." Nora pulled out a photograph from her pocket, one of the pictures from the box, showing her father and Isabella Valeni working together at that table, surrounded by legal documents. "He was brave. Braver than I ever knew." "He was terrified," Marco said. "Every day, he was terrified that something would happen to you, that his past would catch up and destroy the life he'd built for you. But he never let that fear stop him from doing what was right." Nora stood looking at Marco. In the morning light, he looked different. Younger, less burdened. The past week had changed him. Letting go of his father's empire had lifted something from his shoulders. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I have a degree in business administration I never used. Maybe I'll actually use it," he smiled. "What about you?" "I'm thinking about going back to school. Law school. Finishing what my father started. Using the system to protect people instead of just pushing papers." He'd like that. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the dawn breaking over the cemetery. The first light of peace, Nora thought, remembering the brief she'd read in that envelope weeks ago. Peace neither of them had known in years. "Thank you," she said finally, "for keeping your promise. For telling me the truth. Thank you for showing me there was another way." Marco picked up the empty box. "Your father was right. Truth isn't vengeance. It's the only way out." As they walked back toward the cemetery gates together, Nora felt something shift inside her. Her father's secrets were no longer a wall between them. They were a bridge, connecting who he'd been to who she was becoming. 6 months later, Nora stood in front of a renovated community center in Brooklyn, watching workers hang a banner above the entrance. The letters were bold and clear: Sterling Foundation, second chances for new beginnings. Her father's name, finally attached to something public, something good. The building had once been a warehouse, not unlike the one where she'd confronted Dario with Marco. But now it was transformed: bright paint, new windows, a basketball court visible through the glass doors. Inside were classrooms for job training, computers for resume building, counselors who specialized in helping former gang members transition to legitimate work. "Nervous?" asked Sarah, Nora's cousin, who'd been helping coordinate the opening ceremony. "Terrified," Nora admitted. She wore a navy suit, professional but approachable. Her acceptance letter to Columbia Law School sat framed in her apartment. Classes started in the fall. But this, the foundation, would continue regardless. It was her father's legacy, properly honored at last. The funding had come from Marco, though his name appeared nowhere on the paperwork. Anonymous donations, funneled through the newly legitimate businesses he'd restructured. The restaurants, the construction companies, the real estate holdings, all of them now operated cleanly, paying taxes, following regulations, contributing to the community instead of exploiting it. It had been expensive, transforming an empire built on crime into something legal. Marco had lost more than half his wealth in the process, and most of his former associates had abandoned him. But he'd done it anyway. "Because your father asked me to be different," he'd told her during one of their late-night planning sessions. To find another way. People began arriving for the ceremony, city council members, community leaders, former gang members who'd volunteered to mentor in the program. News cameras set up across the street. This was a feel-good story, the kind the media loved. Hope rising from tragedy, a daughter honoring her father's memory. None of them knew the full truth. They didn't know about the midnight meeting in the cemetery, the wooden box full of evidence, or the Mafia boss who'd kept a promise. They didn't need to know. Some truths were meant to stay buried. Nora scanned the growing crowd, looking for one face in particular. "He won't come," Sarah said, reading her thoughts. "Too risky, right?" "Probably," Nora agreed. But she kept looking anyway. The ceremony began at noon. Nora gave a speech about second chances, about her father's belief that everyone deserved the opportunity to change their path. She talked about redemption without mentioning that she'd learned the concept from a man most people would call a criminal. "My father spent his life helping people who'd lost their way," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "He believed that our worst mistakes don't have to define us, that we can choose every day to be better than we were yesterday." The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. A teenager who'd be part of the first mentorship class came up to shake her hand, his eyes bright with hope and nervousness. As the formal program ended and people mingled, accepting refreshments and touring the facility, Nora slipped away to a quiet corner of the basketball court. Through the windows, she could see the crowd outside, celebrating this new beginning. And then she saw him. Marco stood at the far edge of the gathering, partially hidden behind a food truck. No bodyguards, no black suit, no entourage. Just a man in jeans and a blue button-down shirt, wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. He'd let his hair grow longer, and he looked almost ordinary. Almost. Their eyes met across the distance. He didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't acknowledge her in any way that would draw attention. But he gave a single small nod. Nora nodded back. Then Marco turned and walked away, disappearing into the Brooklyn streets like he'd never been there at all. That evening, Nora returned to her apartment to find an envelope slipped under her door. For a moment, her heart stopped, the memory of that first cream-colored envelope flooding back. But this one was different, plain white, with her name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Isabella Valenti, older now, her dark hair streaked with silver, standing in a garden somewhere sunny. She was smiling, truly smiling, holding a cup of tea and surrounded by flowers. On the back, someone had written, "She's safe. Happy. Thanks to your father. Thanks to you." Also in the envelope was a business card. Plain, simple, consulting services with a phone number and nothing else. Nora understood. If she ever needed help, if the foundation ran into trouble, if she found herself facing darkness she couldn't handle alone, there was someone she could call. Not a criminal, not a boss, just a man who owed her father everything and had learned, finally, to pay his debts through means other than violence. She placed the photograph on her bookshelf, next to the framed picture of her father from his accounting firm ID badge. Two versions of the truth, side by side. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "You killed it today. Dad would be so proud." Nora smiled. Yes, he would be. Not because she'd exposed a murderer or dismantled a criminal conspiracy, but because she'd taken something broken, his secret life, his hidden sacrifices, and transformed it into something that helped people. She'd found redemption in the ashes their fathers left behind. Outside her window, the city hummed with life. Millions of people moving through their days, carrying their own secrets, their own regrets, their own hopes for second chances. Nora had spent 35 years as one more anonymous face in that crowd, never knowing she was connected to a world of shadows and debts and impossible promises. Now she knew better. And knowing, she understood what her father had tried to tell her in that final letter. The only way to survive darkness is to carry your own light. She picked up the business card, studied it for a moment, then placed it in her wallet. Just in case. But she hoped, truly hoped, she'd never need to use it. Because the story that began at midnight in a graveyard had finally found its ending in the daylight. And that, Nora thought, was exactly how her father would have wanted it.
The end.